Gentlemen, mic is yours.
Good morning, everyone. I'm David Schwartz. I'm in charge of speakers. I'm the Vice President of Operations, they tell me. And welcome to this wonderful meeting. It's nice to be back. I want to thank Mike Perloff for standing here, for bringing Vito Roselli, our speaker this morning. We're delighted to have him come. And Mike is going to do the introduction. Thank you.
Thanks, Dave. Thank you, David. It's my pleasure to introduce a man who I met through the public and private security initiatives that I'm fortunate enough to participate in. Vito Roselli joined the FBI in 1997. He represented the FBI overseas at times, but at one time in Iraq during the war. His specialty coming up through the ranks was violent crimes, drugs. A few times he headed some, what do we call it now? He headed national efforts against drugs, I believe. And currently he's been the special agent in charge of the FBI for this part of New Jersey. But before I begin, I do want to mention something. Let's assume that Jeff Laurie did something really bad. You're not going to yell at the football players, are you? Are you? Are you? No. Yes. All right. So, now, Vito is one of these special agents who works on the ground. He has less than nothing to do with things that you may not be happy at the national level with the people in charge of the FBI. So please keep that in mind when he asks for questions. Mr. Roselli, it's all yours.
Thank you. Well, first, thank you very much for having me. I understand this chapter's been in business for 30 plus years. Very impressive. Look around, you got all kinds of folks, all age groups, so very impressive. Again, thanks for having me. Like Mike said, I've been in the Philadelphia division for 26 years. I refer to myself as a knuckle dragger as my 20-year on the street responsibilities. And then now I sit behind the desk in Cherry Hill, and we cover 3 counties, Camden, Gloucester, Salem counties. So I had a very fun career. It's coming to an end. They kick us feds out at 57. So end of February, I'm out. So I do appreciate this time to kind of reminisce a little bit. Yep.
Put it on your shoulder.
Sure.
Or your lapel or something.
That's this one. All right. I'm not a professional presenter, so what I was asked, you guys had a pretty neat idea about putting out a survey and seeing what the topics you would like to cover. So I'll go over initially, that's it on my career. If you want to ask questions at the end, go ahead. But I'm going to go over initially anti-Semitic, the trend in anti-Semitic hate crimes, what the FBI has, some of the research that's out there, some of the research I did. I'll try and stay to the PowerPoint, but I'm going to go off script quite a bit. And I'll try and keep this to 20 or to 30 minutes. I don't want to bore everybody. But if you have questions, go ahead, raise your hand, interrupt, whatever. Very, very informal. And then afterwards, you also wanted to talk about how you do an investigation. So I got 70 slides here. I'll fire through a bunch of them, or I may just forget and just start rambling. So I hope you don't mind. But there's a lot that goes into investigations. Obviously, FBI has the full gamut of criminal jurisdiction from the white-collar side, which incorporates everything from public corruption, complex financial crimes, healthcare fraud's a huge issue. Elder fraud kind of falls along all the gamuts, but that's huge. Cyber intrusions, cyber crimes, obviously that's the big thing that everybody's talking about. That impacts everybody from the retirees up to national security assets and private industry. So we also do on the violent crime side. We consider child exploitation, crimes against children, human trafficking, kidnappings, extortions, then of course all the other traditional gangs, criminal enterprises, organized crime. And then what I did, I was a robbery guy. In Philly, I did about 15 plus years in Philly on the violent crime bank robbery squad. That was a lot of fun. Philly used to be next to Los Angeles, and not a far second was the bank robbery capital of the country, also the armored trucks. That's fallen off quite a bit as kind of the criminal element has kind of evolved. That was a little too dangerous for them. And now they've unfortunately started expanding their merits into other fields, and actually they're getting into white-collar crime. The frauds, the COVID fraud's been huge. Can't tell you the billions of dollars that has gone basically feeding traditional gangbangers and supporting the local drug economy is our tax dollar money through the COVID fraud program. A lot of folks have figured out how to defraud it, Mr. Aronow is nodding his head. That's a huge problem. That'll be a huge problem for several more years. And then, of course, gangs. I'll talk a little bit about the way you investigate crimes, targeting the gangs and the robbery crews, but it's kind of similar for the white-collar, approach as well. Everybody's kind of, what I found is everybody's kind of the same motivations, whether you went to Harvard and have some big law firm and you're manipulating the market, to going around and running a drug set and knowing your numbers better than probably, and myself for sure, and knowing how to make money. So it's all pretty much the same. So without any questions on that? Okay. So that anymore, going to start off with the crimes. I'll go over what goes into a hate crime. A lot of times, people say, "Hey, he said this about me," and throw in a reference to either my religion, ethnicity, orientation. That's not necessarily a hate crime. It has to be up against a group. So I'm going to read off my notes here and go over a couple of examples so you understand exactly what we have to look at when we're evaluating what a hate crime is or is not. And unfortunately, it's a trend for, it's been spiking for quite a bit. Make sure I get this right.
Guys, out of respect for the speaker, could you please turn your phones off?
All right. So this is what we look at, the federally protected classes. So you can all read. I'm not going to bore you with it. There's some legal technicalities on, for example, familial status. That deals with the Fair Housing Act, but everything else is what most everybody understands what a hate crime is. So I'm not going to dwell on this. Everybody can see that, but this is what we have to consider. It's not just that the crime or an incident happened, whether that's an assault, vandalism, whether there's physical injury, or whether it's comments or threats. So in general, a hate crime is a criminal offense such as a murder, assault, arson, vandalism, or threats that is motivated by one's hate against a group of people or a class of people protected by law. And then hate, it's a little misleading. We have the First Amendment, so hate speech is not necessarily a crime. It's horrible, but hate speech has to be directed towards causing harm, not to an individual, and making comments about that specific individual. It has to be a comment about the group. If everybody understands the difference there.
Yes.
Okay, and this is the trajectory of after Civil War. You had the conspiracy against, they called it the KKK Act. That made it a crime to assault, and that was specifically geared towards a race. And then all the way into 1968, this started dealing with abortion, right to life, and then of course the whole civil rights movement in the 1960s. That's what pushed the Congress to pass the Violent Interference with Federally Protected Rights. Church Arson Act, there were a series of church arsons in the mid-90s. And that prompts Congress to act again. Hate crimes prevention. That was obviously after 9/11. Now there started to be a lot of animus towards the Muslim population. COVID-19 Hate Crime Act. Everybody remembers the news. That's more recent. That's where a lot of the Asian attacks, physical attacks, online social media threats, and then the Emmett Till Anti-Lynching Act. It basically was the first time that lynching became an actual federal element to as part of our hate crime statutes. Any questions on that? Okay. I'll brief you this. I don't think you're interested in the federal statutes and all the elements that go into it, but the federal statute book is pretty thick, and it specifically lists what the crimes are, whether there's conspiracy as part of it. Words really matter in the statute book, so it's very complicated. So I'll blow past this, but these are the statutes that refer to the previous congressionally passed mandates that we just discussed. All right, hate crime indicators. First, the victim has to be part of a protected class. Not everybody can claim a hate crime. The comments, written statements or gestures, again, it's got to be, we have to look at, is it looking at not just the individual that the gestures or comments may have been addressed to, but is it more of the group that the person is part of, okay? And it has to be specific. So I'm going to have a couple of examples here about what's the difference between making a general statement like, I hate all Muslims, I wish they were all dead, to you're a Muslim, I hate you, I'm going to shoot every Muslim I see. That's a difference, okay? So that's what we have to look at. It's horrible that they say the first statement, but unfortunately, that's the way it is. And then everybody knows you call 911 if it's an immediate issue. You call my office at the end, I'll throw my number out. Please feel free to reach out, call up if there's an incident. In most of the state of New Jersey, it works the same. The first responders are going to be the Camden County, the county prosecutor's office. They'll have a team that'll go out. You'll have your local municipality, but the detectives and investigators will be responding from the prosecutor's office. They reach out to us. Sometimes we also get a referral where we'll reach out to them. But they'll be basically the frontline investigators, and we go to see if the crime or the incident meets the federal standards. We then reach out to the U.S. Attorney's Office and just work it out with them whether they think there's enough here to go ahead and initiate a case. Basically, there's predication for a case, and then we open a case, and then we move the case forward. We're a little slow in plotting. We do search warrants on electronics, on social media. We serve subpoenas and search warrants to Google, Facebook, Instagram. And then we move forward, but in a very slow pace. And sometimes that's a little frustrating for folks, but we have to make sure that we're meeting all the elements and we can prove it at trial.
Question.
Sir?
You skip over the township, go right to the county?
I'm sorry?
You skip the town.
Well, so the local municipalities, the township, the police departments, that 911 call will go to them. New Jersey's actually really good. New Jersey's nationally recognized. The New Jersey Office of Homeland Security and Protection, NJOHSP. It's basically the state version of Department of Homeland Security. Everybody uses New Jersey as a model for how to respond to incidents that are above and beyond the local municipalities' resource capabilities. So they're going to respond. They'll be the first ones to take reports. It's graffiti, it's vandalism, it's an actual assault. They'll immediately call in the county prosecutors who have a direct line to NJOHSP if it reaches to that level, that it's a broader threat, and then they get involved. They're They're putting 1 million emails out a day about, you know, the different incidents, different trends. So New Jersey's pretty squared away. But the municipalities, they don't have the horses to look at the longer term or the elements to possibly have the state charge or the U.S. attorneys come in and charge. Does that make sense? Yeah. Good. Sorry about that. Yeah, my phone call's the best bet. You know, call me, call my office. But there's also an online tip line. We also have the NTOC. That goes to our National Threat Operations Center down in Clarksburg, Virginia. You can do that online, and if it's a threat to life, if it's something immediate, they're reaching out to the office. It actually gets down to me very quickly. So a threat goes into the NTOC line. If they say, oh, this is imminent, they'll immediately reach out to our operations center. Then they'll call me. Also, we have somebody that's always on call, and then we respond immediately. That happens, you know, could happen within an hour. So we're relatively, the system's down to a science, you know, unfortunately, because of the number of incidents we've had. This is something interesting I found. Just kind of, this is the ADL did this study a couple of years ago. And it's, whoop, sorry about that, folks. So you see the top one, stick together more than other Americans. I call that tribalism, right? And that's a perception from all age groups. So what ADL found interesting is that the young age group was just as was just as fervent in that belief as the older folks. You would think the younger folks are a little more open-minded. That's not the case. That's not what this study found. So that's why I wanted to throw this up here. And I'll talk a little bit about tribalism because it's not just breaking everybody down into their groups. It's not just the Jewish community. It's every group is having an issue and spike over the last couple of years in hate crimes and incidents.
Quick question.
Sir.
The first two categories I wouldn't consider anti-Semitic. Stick together more than other Americans, I wish that were true. And business go out of the way to hire other Jews. Every group tends to be more comfortable with their own people. I wouldn't consider that anti-Semitic either.
No, 1,000%. I agree with you. Perception, you know, makes reality. This is the survey, and I think it was over 4,000 folks that they interviewed. That's why I wanted to put that up, because of your sentiment exactly. That report was geared towards Jewish community, and that's what we found. But you probably say that about any group, and that's the trend. It's breaking people down into groups. Everybody thinks, oh, that group always hangs together, and the fear of something different. That's why I put that up, because I found that interesting for your.
But if you're using statistics of anti-Jewish stereotypes, those are by far the most prevalent. That really skews the statistics of what is anti-Semitism.
Understood. Yes. Perception, reality. This is perception.
Question.
Yes.
Are these actual statements that these people thought of just out of their heads, or were these actually listed and they selected them?
You know, I'm not sure how they did that survey. This goes down. There's quite a few more topics, but the questions are the surveys where they work, the scientific surveys. You have the same questions, and they're the ones that come up with them. You know, unfortunately, as you know, sometimes surveys can be skewed for an answer. I'm not sure about the details behind the survey. I just put it up because of the perception that that's a group that hangs together. But all groups do.
I'm quite surprised that stick together more than other
Yeah.
is number one. I would have expected loyal to Israel.
Well, that's what I would have thought as well. And that's why this was surprising. That's why I wanted to put it up, just to hammer home the point that perception has become reality. It doesn't mean that's actually what's happening. Yes?
Question. Using this logic in a somewhat of a pattern, why was 5 black policemen killed this time? mean, this is really strange. Where's their motivation? Where's their loyalty to anything? What's your reason? What would you do?
Well, I want to make sure. I got to watch. I got to watch out. Putting my personal opinion, on things that's not scientifically proven or a statement until all the facts, come out in that incident. We all saw that video. It was absolutely horrible. There are a whole bunch of indicators and reasons that go into why that happened. The issues that are coming up, you hear it on the news, is it's black on black crime. It's the fact that, there's so many urban black lives that are being lost to violence that life has become irrelevant or inconsequential. To those 5 black officers that did it, and you start going back to, you got to look at their training. Did you lower standards for the sake of equity? All those questions have to come out and be answered. Personally, the obvious ones, and the one that's out of the news, I'm not talking too much out of hand, is the training. You either training is not it. That was a moral issue. But the fact that they did it, knowing that the body-worn cameras are on, to me that goes towards culture. That goes towards knowing that it's there. That's not the first time something like that happens. So that investigation needs to come out and see if that's the case, and then change that culture. I don't know what the end result is going to be, but
let's be realistic.
Yeah.
It was not. The logic is, why did they do it? What motivated them? Why would they attack another black person?
So again, let the study come out. They're going to investigate it. They're going to see what the reasons are. Why is there no video leading up to that point? What goes on? This individual, the victim, didn't have any criminal history. There's a whole bunch of stuff that goes into that. Let's talk a little bit more at the end of it. We could sit here all day on that topic itself, but that's a huge issue.
In your opinion, how long will go in this investigation? How long?
Can you repeat the question?
How long will the investigation go on before the answers come out? I can't tell you. Each one is different. So what'll happen? I'll get a little bit, actually. That's a good question. So I'll get a little bit into that about how a federal investigation, proceeds. But yeah, so that's a tough situation. I don't have the answers.
Was there any other reports of other ethnic groups besides Jewish people?
No, this is from the ADL, specifically on Jewish people.
ADL, okay.
That's what I mentioned before. I bet you that this will be the same result if you do it towards Muslims, whether you do it towards religion or towards different ethnic groups. Or towards orientation, you'll probably have the same response. Again, that's just the culture and society today, and it's promulgated and it's pushed forward through social media. Everybody putting everything out there and spreading their own conspiracy theories. We'll get into that a little bit in one of these further slides. Okay, and this is not. I didn't capture all of the major incidents that have kind of shown the trend, the unfortunate trend leading up. I'll go over a couple of other stats from FBI crime statistics, but anti-Semitic crimes, anti-Jewish crimes were actually on a decline from 2019 to 2020. All right, and then COVID started. I have a slide here to talk about reasons, and it's just my guesses as to what the reasons could be based on what the FBI puts out, based on what ADL puts out. But there's a lot of reasons for this. But you start with the Unite the Right March. That was a legitimate First Amendment protest. And unfortunately, like all these protests, it gets hijacked by these extremists that come in. So you had a lot of KKK, white nationalists, neo-Nazis that joined that march as well. And of course, you had, you see what happened in Charlottesville. The one individual runs over one of the protesters. And that was pretty much what ignited this whole political and social debate about hate and bias crimes. And then you had the Tree of Life in Pittsburgh, 11 folks. And this is this guy Gregory Bowers. So what you'll see here, and why I wanted to make sure that this incident was put on there, aside from it being horrific, is he was a white nationalist, but he was specifically targeting the Hebrew Immigration Assistance group. He was targeting that policy of the Jewish people. They were immigration. So immigration was this guy's issue. He was a white nationalist, so he hated every other group, but his specific hatred was towards the immigration policy, bringing in folks that were not like him. And killed 11, horrible. And then you have I put the mosque in Christchurch, and the reason obviously that's mosque, it was targeted against Muslims, but the individual responsible for that put out a manifesto. And in that manifesto, he's a white nationalist. He hated all groups, but he hated immigration, immigration policies. He hated he hated Muslims, non-white groups, and Jews. Then you go on to the next one. This Shabbat of Poway Synagogue, California. This was a nursing student. He killed one. Injured a bunch. There were several, unfortunately, there were several Holocaust survivors in that group. He also put a similar manifesto out on the same website that was shared amongst these white nationalists. So that goes towards, the reason I put this up here, because that goes towards the anti-immigrant, anti-anything other than white, and anti-Jewish hatred, and was very similar to the one written by the Australian attacker. And then you go over the next one, which is the Jersey City attack. So you have the white nationalists, and then you had the attack up in Jersey City in North Jersey, and that's the black Hebrew Israelites. So what I wanted to show here is that it's not just the white nationalists, it's every group hating another group, The black Hebrew Israelites, I don't know if everybody's familiar with them. I'll call them the BHI, for now. That started back in 1967 out in Chicago. And you had that was a pretty volatile, time. We talked about the 1968 congressional movement, the Emmett Till congressional statute that came out in the 60s. You had the Black Power movement. You had a lot of individuals converting over to different religions, over to Islam. The Nation of Islam came out of that era. This was kind of the more extremist, violent side of that, this behavioral, the Hebrew Israelite movement. And it was basically African Americans started it. They said we were the first Jews, we were the lost tribe, and all the white Jews are frauds, especially the European white Jews are frauds, and they started being very virulent and violent towards the Jewish community. So you have that incident, and then you have the machete incident a little further down. Okay, this was up in New York. It was a Hanukkah party, and if you remember, individual went in with machete and unfortunately attacked. There's about 100 folks in the house, in a rabbi's house, and he went in and he attacked them. He was from New York. He was also a member of the BHI, espousing the same anti-immigrant, anti-anything other than black, anti-Jew hatred. And leading up to that, in New York City, if you remember, there was a spat of attacks on Jews, Hasidic Jews specifically, because they're easy to target because of the uniform. they had about 6 or 7 attacks, physical assaults, men, women, and children, that led up to this machete attack. So the trend kind of changes, and it's basically everybody's hating everybody. So that's my personal opinion. That's why there's a trend in anti-Semitic crime. That's why there's a trend in every type of crime. And then the last, obviously, May of 2021, where the tensions exploded on the Palestinian-Israeli border. A lot of folks killed on both sides. After that, a lot of the sentiment was pushed via social media. I'll go in another slide. I'll show you. There's a study done by George Washington University, which found pretty interesting, is that unfortunately academia was actually pushing an anti-Israeli sentiment, basically favoring the Palestinian side, calling it an occupation, and they pushed that out through indoctrination or whatever you want to call it, through academia, through the young crowd, through the young folks. So that's why that incident is important. As I mentioned before, you know, the Jewish population, 2% of the American population, account for today, or the last FBI statistics, over 60% of the hate crimes. That's unsat. However, based on FBI statistics, again, remember 2019, that was actually on a decline. And then as a result of these incidents, as a result of social media, you know, I got a little slide in here that I'm sure is going to get a lot of questions. As a result of COVID and everybody sitting behind the computers and just espousing these conspiracy theories and are going crazy because people have nothing else to do, you know, whether that had something to do with it. But it's the trend increased after the May battle violence between Israel and Hamas specifically. Okay. So the actors. In George Washington, that study that they did that I was just referring to, great quote, uptick in broadening in scope to include a measurably wide variety of actors with different motivations, ideologies, and grievances. So the GW study wasn't just based on one ideology, it was in a whole. And it was a very long and lengthy study and pretty good. But the actors are, I just threw down a few. Talked about the white nationalists, and then you had the evolution of the black Hebrew Israelites who have been around for a while. I don't know if anybody goes into Philly. They used to sit there, right there by City Hall on the corner. Everybody ignored them. Well, now they've started to become violent, becoming a little more of a threat. They're identified as a hate group, you know, at this point. And then the mainstreaming of hatred, of tribalism, of breaking everybody into their different groups, but specifically the mainstreaming of anti-Jew sentiment.
Your slides are one off.
Whoop.
No, go back. There you go.
Okay, sorry about that, folks. Okay, you got Louis Farrakhan, who's been around for a long time, and everybody knows and have heard some of his anti-white, anti-Jew statements, sentiments. You have a lot of folks mainstreaming him more recently than had been in the past. So you got sports figures, you have comedians, movie personalities coming out specifically supporting or giving credibility to Louis Farrakhan and what he espouses. Then same thing on the white nationalist side. I put Nick Fuentes up there. Allegations of his white nationalism, specific things that he said where he's affirmed what Kanye West recently said about DEFCON 3 to all Jews. He put that out there again. He's a popular figure. He has a wide audience on the podcast, gets to a lot of people worldwide. Again, the advent of social media is exacerbating this anti-hate movement, and specifically the anti-Semitic trend. Talked about academia. That was surprising when I saw that study. You know, hopefully it's being addressed. Hopefully it's an issue. Hopefully, you know, kids are learning critical, you know, how to critically think and apply, you know, thought to what they're being told. But that is an issue.
So can you explain, Kanye West tweets DEFCON 3 on Jewish people.
Right.
That's not a hate crime because that's protected free speech?
That, yes. If you go beyond, if he gets specific, let's say you can put him in contact with individuals that actually engage in a specific incident, you may be able to tie him to supporting that movement through funding, money, actually talking to folks, hey, go do it. Need something specific. That statement in and of itself would not rise to a federal hate crime element. There has to be more to that. He has to do more actions to show that he's actually causing or creating directly the injury, assault, harassment on the Jewish population. So that could be used as an element to federal charges, but that in and of itself, that would not be charged. No. Does that make sense?
But if somebody went out and attacked someone
because of what he said.
And said it was because of that?
I don't. That hasn't happened yet. I don't know the answer to that. However, that's why this is such a difficult thing. You have politicians, again, that talk about mainstream. You have politicians making statements against other politicians, against other politicians who think differently. And then there are violent acts that occur as a result of that. That has to be looked at, but in and of itself, the hate speech wasn't directly related. That person was already motivated. You know, that would have to be looked at individually, and in order for the U.S. attorneys to take, and I can't talk for the U.S. attorneys here, this is very difficult. This is a very difficult topic. It's something that we're looking at all the time and evaluating and reevaluating. After the George Floyd and people were doxing, you know, people's houses. There was an incident in Washington Township. They got the wrong house. Same last name, they got the wrong house, and people start showing up at the houses. We couldn't necessarily charge the individual who doxed that house and said, here it is, go at it, because it needs more specificity. That person, we need more indications that that person is pushing that, has espoused it, have to go back in social media to see if that person has been pushing that out for over a period of time and actually work with folks that actually caused the crime. So it's a very difficult situation, and I'm not the expert at it. Sir?
I got a question. This fellow that beat up Nancy Pelosi's husband, is that a regular crime or is that a hate crime?
So that would not be a hate crime. That's a political. If what was initially put out was accurate, which there's questions about that accuracy, that would be political. That wouldn't be considered a hate crime. That individual, you have to look at that individual. Did he state why he wanted to wait for Nancy Pelosi to come home? As an example, if he said, I wanted her to come home because I don't like Italians, and when she comes home, I'm going to beat her to death because she's Italian, obviously that's a hate crime. The fact that he says, I'm waiting for her to come home, you don't know what that motivation is. It's a crime, it's a threat, it's violence, it's vandalism, breaking in, but it's not a hate crime.
What if it was actually her? Would that still be considered that?
What do you mean?
In other words, if she was there and he attacked her instead of her husband, would it change the venue?
Well, no, because he hasn't, he didn't, unless you go back and you see that he has a manifesto or he put on the social media, hey, I'm going to go after Nancy Pelosi because she's Italian, or I'm going to go after Nancy Pelosi because she's supporting the Jewish community. And then he actually acts out on it, then hate crime statute may come into play.
Vito, thank
Yeah.
you. Gentlemen, if I may, if you're interested in hearing the rest of his presentation, perhaps we should wait for questions until he's completed it.
All right.
Thank you.
Yeah, I knew this was going to, everybody's very emotional about this, every American is, this topic. So, and I don't have all the answers, apologize. However, there's a lot of reasons for this. This is what I found. You got dark web. Everybody knows what the dark web is. So that's basically a free-for-all for criminal activity. It's anonymous. It's just out in the atmosphere. Something like 85% of the Internet of Things. Okay, basically everything that's interconnected. Over 85% of that exists in the dark web. So there's the people are ordering drugs, murder for hire. You know, there's legitimate reasons to be on the dark web also is, hey, I don't want the government snooping on me, or, you know, I want to stay away from getting all these advertisements on my computer because I looked up a new car. But all kinds of activity go on the dark web. It's completely anonymous. On the regular internet that we all use, you have the IP addresses where, unless you go through what's called a VPN, where you anonymize the originator, we can actually still backtrack it with some effort, but it's not anonymous. You can figure out where a message or where a request or where a search was done from. So that's a big thing. Talked about COVID, everybody's, you know, keyboard courage, everybody's behind a keyboard saying stuff and it explodes. You see the rise in juvenile violence. That's a big reason for the rise in juvenile violence is everybody has keyboard courage. You put it out on blast. You know, it can't be, it's not an argument on a street corner where only two other people see you. You know, everybody knows that you just got outed. You got to do something about it. That's driving a lot of the juvenile crime. But COVID conspiracy theories were rampant. Election cycles, you know, we talked about mainstreaming. Politicians making statements that are either inaccurate or looking at trying to drive emotion. Talked about diminishing of the Holocaust and the evils of Nazi Germany. Everything now is, oh, that's a Nazi regime. You're minimizing the horrors of what happened to the Jewish people and gypsies and other undesirables. Focus on tribalism. Everybody's broken down into their groups. When I went out to Iraq, the hatred, what I found going out there was the hatred amongst not just the Muslims against non-Muslims. It was the Muslims against each other. Everybody knows you got the Shia and the Sunni. But then also the tribes and the countries. And then you break that down into the tribes. If you were from a different tribe, regardless of whether you were Sunni, Shia, they hated you. It's just the hatred based on tribalism was incredible. But when I spent months, I talked to a lot of folks, head choppers, terrorists, insurgents. They were all the same. They were just like us. They're no different from us. You know, obviously they act out a little differently than I hope we would. But, you know, the people are the same, but it's the tribalism that causes the problems. And on social media, on our rhetoric, mainstream rhetoric, we're breaking everything down to tribalism. I'm sure it has, you know, could have a impact on the trends, on the hate crime trends. And people are conflating religious hatred with race, and then talked about academia and indoctrination. All right. And yeah, I got a couple of statements here to kind of answer some of the questions about what would raise to the level of a hate crime. So, you know, for example, political hyperbole, you know, it's an exaggeration, okay? If you know, people who do something, support vegetarians, are idiots and should all be shot. You know, generalization. I will slit your throat, I wish you were dead, that's the specific. I will slit your throat because you are a whatever, a guinea, and then actually acts out on it, or makes that threat where I'm in fear of thinking he's legitimate. That's different. That could be a hate crime if you can show that he is not just saying that in the heat of the moment. Does that make sense? All right. All right. So it's a hot. We can sit here all day and going back and forth, and I don't have a lot of answers for you. It's unfortunate. And that's half the problem. It's misunderstanding. Misunderstanding people. Bottom line is there is an upward spike. There is a trend. It needs to reverse. The other important thing you must realize is that there's a lot of misinformation is a popular word being thrown out, but in this case, reporting is not accurate. So it measures the trend, but the reporting comes from statistics. FBI maintains all its statistics in what's called the Uniform Crime Reporting Code, and a lot of police departments, they don't put the information in, garbage out. So there's really quite a large percentage of police departments that don't participate in submitting their reports or submitting their findings into the FBI statistics to compile accurate data. So that's been a major issue we've been fighting. It's something called the NIBRS. It's a National Incident Based Reporting. There's less than 50% of police departments effectively, accurately, correctly, or not at all participate in the NIBRS system. That's where a lot of the hate crime statutes come from. So you can throw figures out. I've got quite a few more. Here, when I was researching this, which are quite astounding, the Tel Aviv University did a fantastic study on Jewish hate crimes, anti-Semitic hate crimes, and they found the U.S., New York, Los Angeles, doubled their hate crime incidents from 20 to 21. Germany, France, Australia, Canada, their numbers have spiked as well. So it's not just a U.S. problem. It's a world problem. And that was just on anti-Semitic hate issues. So I didn't realize that it was so expansive. And that they did that study after the May 21 Hamas-Israeli feud. So I got a couple more stats here, but it basically says the same thing. There is a trend over the past couple of years. It's getting, unfortunately, getting worse. A lot of reasons for it. We could all speculate about the reasons. So let's open it up for a discussion.
Question.
Yes.
Any statistics on Jew crime?
No, that's actually a good question, but I don't know that's a good question because again, Hasidic Jews and mainline Jews, there are issues there. That's actually a good question, but I don't know the answer.
Anything that the Tel Aviv study about that, Hasidic versus regular?
No, and it could be. That was a long study. It could be, but I did not see it. Yeah.
When you mentioned the spike from 20 to 21,
yeah,
you mentioned the Israel-Palestinian thing. How about COVID? Do you think COVID plays into?
So yeah. So talk about the spike in May of 21. And I'll mention that May the incidents doubled worldwide.
Right.
Okay. So COVID, which started back in March of 20 is when we really started going on, on the shutdowns and so forth, and everybody started hitting the keyboard. That also, a couple of studies have also attributed conspiracy theories which have led to the violence to COVID and everybody sitting down, jumping on the computer. So absolutely, sir.
This is not this is another FBI question. The stuff on TV doesn't the FBI have to oversee, I like Criminal Minds, and I look at the credits, I don't see any, it's overseen by the FBI.
I'm sorry, I missed the beginning
Does the
part of that.
FBI have to oversee any TV shows, like, that cites the FBI? No?
No.
Oh, and number two.
I wish they would, but no.
What?
I wish they would, but no. We get beat up a lot.
What about the, do you have to, like, you're in charge of 3 New Jersey counties?
Yes.
But you have to adhere to, like, the Philadelphia thing? Or?
Well, no. So my boss sits in Philly, so I'm part of Philadelphia division, but all my investigations go through the District of New Jersey. That's the federal U.S. Attorney's Office.
Right.
You know, it's not like Phil Arano, you know, is a state prosecutor.
Right.
Different charge, different statutes. Sir?
So when you receive what you think is a credible report
Yep.
of a possible hate crime, what are the stages?
So,
Supervised, not necessarily performing your own office, but the stages you should take.
so everybody has to be warned, and that kind of goes. It's the same. That'll go into my next topic. I think I don't want to be here that much longer and put everybody to sleep. I'll talk a little bit about how investigations start. But good question. We have to gather the data, so there's intelligence gathering. We have to make sure that the federal involvement, there's a federal nexus for us to get involved. So the initial report comes in. A lot of times it's an initial report and there's a lot of information left out, it's a lot of inaccurate information. We work with our local partners and it's very, very efficient. We all know each other. And like I said, New Jersey really is pretty squared away as far as sharing information quickly and determining which venue is going to be the best venue, whether it's federal or keeping it in the state. So I would get it in, I'd research it, I would get one of my agents to reach out to the responding county prosecutor or NJOHSP investigator that sent the referral over. They would talk, we'd share reports, we'd go out to the scene on many occasions, and then we start doing, we have a bunch of outstanding analysts that start doing social media dumps to see if there's a biased trend. And then we present that to the U.S. Attorney's Office, and then even though we will open up a case, doesn't mean that it'll meet that federal bar, the federal statute of hate crime. We have to then go get our search warrants. So if it probably is a hate crime, that gives us enough to do search warrants on social media, on Google, on Facebook, on Meta, on Instagram. So and now you have all these applications that don't store records, but sometimes they remain public. Somebody else has it, sir.
So a few months ago,
Yeah.
some of the traffic control boxes were emblazoned with Hamas and Palestinian kill the Jews flags. If you can read Arabic, that's what it said.
Right.
They were up for quite a number of weeks. What are we able to, or who are we able to invite to future meetings, including law enforcement breakfasts, who can ensure us that our synagogues, our houses of worship, our schools, our community centers, our apartments for disabled are well protected?
Excellent question. That's always a battle and an effort that we in the FBI are always trying to do. And again, we work with NJOHSP and our local law enforcement partners to do outreach and awareness on, hey, this is what a hate crime is. We have a couple of folks that do this professionally that will come out and say, hey, this is what we do. We can't talk specifically about investigations. If we're able to find something to pin it on an individual to further that investigation, we can come out and say exactly what we're doing and who we're dealing with. Right now, there's a big push for active shooters, for example, and that also incorporates any type of violence against groups in protecting physical infrastructure. So we are working with NJOHSP and State AG's office to come up with a threat assessment team to identify specific indicators and identify specific actors, and what are we going to do to harden possible targets of those individuals. So that's all in the works. That's a good question. Sir.
The difficulty, is it true that the difficulty is to make the decision between freedom of speech and a criminal?
Yes.
threat.
Yes. Yes, and it's hard to separate what your gut's telling you and your own emotional response. You know, us investigators, we're humans as well, to what's going to meet the federal statute. But it's very difficult to make that determination. That's why it's the totality of circumstances, the history, and you have to analyze whether that threat was more specifically geared towards an individual, or was it geared towards the group, and was it specific enough where that group would reasonably fear for some kind of retaliation. Does that make sense? But that's the biggest question, and that's the biggest challenge that we have.
To this question, I have a comment to this question. Today, hate crime is spread by mass media. All people that have hate, they spread this hate by using mass media. And mass media cover it by First Amendment. Today, it's time to correct First Amendment, because for free speech, you have to have responsibility for free speech.
Yes.
If you spread hate from one people to another people, you have to be responsible for that. And it has to be right.
So, and that's what we talked about. We could, again, be sitting here, forever, talking about the philosophical debate on censorship, free speech. That's a good issue. I don't have that answer for you. But you're true.
Real quick, you're here, it's great, very informative. Does the FBI or yourself reach out to like high schools, like seniors and so forth, to give them a presentation, but they know what's happening? Yes.
So we do outreach quite a bit. And if you want, for your local high school, for us to come out and talk about anti-hate, critical thinking, all kinds of topics. For example, there's a huge push to bring awareness about online threats. We absolutely make an effort to go out to high schools and bring awareness. So if you want something, let me know.
You worked in this area for how many years did you?
So I did 20 over in Philly and 6 here, between being on the street and behind the desk.
What do you see now and over in this particular location that you work? What are you noticing about anti-Semitism and those types of things?
So like nationwide, as we said, there's definitely an uptick. The percentage of the uptick, what I mentioned before, may be inaccurate, but the perception of an uptick is what's important. So that's what I see, is the hatred, but not just anti-Semitic crime.
In investigating, I mean, have there been, we know that in this, the JCC, there were threats of bombs here, and they had to investigate that. They have in this building, we also have a Holocaust group, we have an anti-Semitic group, that they even have this book here that they want us to read, and they need the discussion about it. It's not just reading it. So, I mean, in this area, in this community, not the whole country, but Europe.
So in this community is, yes, the complaints have been going through the roof. So we have 2 separate programs. I'm on the criminal side. You have a domestic terrorism side as well. Right. We had some changes, so in a month that's going to fall under me. Our domestic terrorism side are the ones that respond to those incidents, but we assist them in those investigations, and I've seen the spread.
What area do you
So
focus in on?
I'm on the. So you got the criminal, everything other than domestic terrorism, hate crimes, and civil rights crimes are 2 different, issues. Civil rights under me, hate crimes under what we call a joint terrorism task force. However, we all work those cases together. The answer to your question is yes. There's been a trend. There's been a trend in reporting, and we do in this area. But again, it matches the national perception.
Agent Roselli, did you have more presentations?
Yeah, I did. So, yes, sir.
Are you hiring more agents as a result of this rise?
So that's Congress mandated. Congress has to give us a budget. They give us a certain amount of agents. I don't know, and that's a 5-year outlook. I don't know if they increased us for this year, but we have been on a recruiting binge for the last couple of years. Let me, after this question, I'm going to talk briefly about investigations, and then I think everybody had enough. Sir.
I think about two people that I remember from the past.
Yeah.
One of whom was Meyer Kahana. Meyer Kahana was a strong Jewish supporter, very controversial, and then Curtis Sliwa. And both of them believed in civilian protection for themselves. What are your thoughts about civilian self-defense,
Okay.
trained civilian self-defense?
Okay. Training is huge. That goes into my personal opinion. I want to be careful about putting anything out there. So I'm an FBI agent. But if you're going to be having a gun in your own for your own self-defense, you have to get trained. You have to know how to use a gun. You have to know how to differentiate between what's a threat and what's not. That's a big issue up in New York. Now that's big news where a lot of stores are hiring their own private security, and some politicians saying, hey, that's what you need to do. Personal decision. I don't really want to get into that. But let me jump into investigations. So I knew that was going to be a tough topic. Everybody has an opinion. Bottom line, there's a trend. There's a lot of reasons for it, and something has to be done about it. If you have a complaint, the bomb threats, vandalism, every single one of those comes our way. We review it. We review it with NJOHSP. It gets a lot of attention. It doesn't always get a result, and that's unfortunate. But we have to have evidence to move a case forward, and it has to meet the certain bar. And it's very difficult to understand what that bar is. And sometimes I don't understand. I disagree with the U.S. Attorney's Office decisions as well. So it's a very difficult situation, but it does get addressed. Mike has my information. I'll put it up on the screen at the end here. But any threats or incidents, or you want to discuss it more, feel free to give me a holler. All right. So investigations. I got a bunch of slides on that, but I'm just going to not even bore you with the slides. So investigations are generally run the same way, and we kind of touched on it here with how we approach hate crimes, but it's the same approach. So my thing was knuckle dragger, but it's the same as if you were working a SEC violation. You have to gather the information and see if there's a predication for us to get involved. So that's important. So those are referrals, those are source information, people cooperating, walk-ins. We get it from any which way. We go out, we develop informants. They tell us, hey, you want to take a look over here. And that's how we start looking in certain areas. We also work together. We kind of know who the problems are. So law enforcement over the past several years has become properly so much more intelligence driven and statistically driven on areas that are creating the most crime or impact on a community or society. So that's where we try and focus our efforts. So we have what's called on the gang side, we have something called the enterprise theory of investigation. So you have intelligence, you look at a group, you see if that group is, how they're impacting that community and how involved they are across state lines. If they're dealing with the Mexican cartel and in getting their meth is now a big thing coming up from Mexico. Fentanyl, of course, everybody's hearing about the evils of fentanyl, coming across. If that particular gang is the one that has the connections, we'll focus on that gang. Then we have to infiltrate that gang. So somebody like me can't just walk up and into an Hispanic gang out of Camden or a black gang out of Camden and expect them to tell me what's going on. We have to get folks that are from that environment. There's a whole reason for them to come forward. A lot of times it's monetary. We can pay pretty well.
Infiltrate agent.
Infiltration agent, right. So we have to infiltrate that organization. We have to find out the structure, how they communicate, how they move. We have different gangs. We mentioned about Instagram and the applications that are more anonymous or more temporary, where they have communications and then that communication disappears and we can't pull it back, so we can't see the history of who they're talking to. Those are all the challenges that we have today, but there's also technology, and advances in technology help us out as well to further investigation. So you have to find that individual that has a grudge against that group. So it could be a jilted girlfriend, it could be somebody who got caught and had to was trying to save their own skin. That's the person we target. We get them in, we give them some money. Hey, go hang out at the corner. Here's go buy a fifth of Jack and hang out at the corner and socialize with folks. Works like a charm. Your main targets, you check their criminal history. Some of them, somewhere they had a domestic incident in there. You find out who that person was. You go to that person. Same thing on a white collar investigation. It's the same type of approach. You have to gather the intelligence. How impactful is it? A recent case, this active case, I won't get into the details now, but we did indict a couple of folks. It was this Hometown International. It was an SEC market manipulation investigation down in Paulsboro. Yeah, so it's, millions of dollars, international. The one guy we indicted was actually in Hong Kong, fled to Thailand. We're going to pick him up. He's in custody in Thailand. We're going to pick him up. So it's international. But that investigation was run the same way that we would run a typical knuckle-dragging gang investigation. We got a referral. We started looking into it. We started determining what the impact was, how they were manipulating the market. We started getting all our data and had our intel analysts looking at IP addresses on, this same IP address was buying and selling on the same day. So you look at that, you look at, all right, how does that impact the market? We reached out to our SEC counterparts, the experts, and they gave us an education on this is how they're doing it, why they're doing it, this is the impact. So I said, all right, we're in 1,000%. So that case is going on, but it's the same way that we would approach a drug gang, or I used to love over in Philly, not so much anymore, but they used to have these robbery crews that were generational. The dads would have the sons going out and stealing cars for them to use as the getaway vehicles. And what you would do is, that's a family. That's a family unit. That's kind of hard to crack into. But you'd find, we found the girlfriends. First thing I would do, we'd get the phone record, see who's calling who, so you could put the organization together. And then you have to figure out who you're going to target. That's usually that's the most overt stage on who you're going to target. Is that person going to blow my case out of the water? It's a gamble, but that's why you have to have good intelligence folks to make an educated guess on who to approach.
You find some groups are just so stupid that they make it so.
Well, then yes, then that's the other thing is there are absolutely some groups that still talk on the phone. It's crazy, but they know that how easy it is for us to go up on phones, but they still talk on phones because they think they're untouched. But normally those aren't the ones that are most impactful. They are the ones causing the most violence because they're stupid and they're a little more,
To get a search warrant, it's really hard to get, like, a proponent malefactor.
Well, a search warrant, and depending on its probable cause, that's 51% that this probably happened. It's probably more likely that it happened than not.
But how do you convince
So you write an affidavit. So you do your investigation, you get your intelligence, you get your informants, folks that actually know. So you have actually statements that, hey, I witnessed this, and you put that in an affidavit. You work it through the U.S. Attorney's Office, and then you go present it to a judge. A judge says, yes, you have enough for a search warrant. Sir?
How realistic are programs like NCIS?
Or FBI or Criminal Minds. Yeah.
Because I like the shows.
The shows are an hour long. You can't solve a crime in an hour, number one. We don't have computers that's, somebody touched the surface and you take some fancy tool and all of a sudden this face pops up. Doesn't exist. We do have some pretty cool stuff.
And then you run shorter jets they can use.
Yeah, we don't, we can't, well, sometimes we can do that. But anyway, TV, and we call it the CSI effect. And I've had a bunch of trials. And the thing that you have to prove is you have to prove negatives. You have to prove why, if somebody didn't have a glove on and they touched the counter, why you didn't have a fingerprint off the counter. Government's hiding something. That's the CSI effect. Why isn't somebody's DNA, on that screen that I just just touched. Sometimes it transfers, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it gets destroyed. So the CSI effect is a very big deal. It's a very big issue. That's actually an excellent question that impacts law enforcement. We actually have to go out of our way to prove negatives that, hey, this is why, even though the guy had his hand on the gun, we didn't get DNA, we didn't get fingerprints, because it doesn't always transfer. It's unrealistic. I've had a lot of cases, arrested a lot of folks. In a lot of my trials, you know, I didn't have forensic evidence. You know, sometimes it just doesn't exist. It's not TV. And we have to actually address that with the jury to explain to them, it's not TV. We don't have a magic wand. You don't leave DNA, you know, all over the place when you walk by. But when you do get it, it's devastating, you know.
Vito,
sir,
what are you doing next?
Me?
Yeah, we wouldn't know.
You're retiring.
Well, I'm going. My wife's Cuban girl from Miami. So her turn, we're going down to Miami. I retire at the end of February from the FBI. I'm looking for a job. If anybody's looking to hire in Miami, let me know. So I'm heading down there. So just following up on the investigation, I think, you know, I probably talked enough. But once you get the predication, you then present it to the U.S. Attorney's Office. You know, unfortunately, the U.S. Attorney's Office has their own guidelines. And as you see in the current trend, it's not as easy to reach that bar based on laws that have been passed. So the feds used to bring a lot of teeth to the table because our guidelines were harsh. Whatever you think of that, you know, you had mandatory minimums, and that forced a lot of people to cooperate. That's how you make your cases. You have all these fancy gadgets and all this technology, but the way you make cases is you have to have somebody cooperating on the inside, explaining what the situation is. When the feds come to the table, we come with a hammer, and people cooperate. Recent laws have impacted our ability to bring the hammer to the table, so things have changed.
Available when the meeting's over, you'll be able to stay a couple minutes?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Yeah.
Wonderful. In that case,
yeah,
I will thank you.
Well, thank you. Appreciate it. Thanks.
I'm sure you could probably stay for another 10 hours to answer questions. I think, yeah, oh, there you are.